Well, welcome to our study of this letter that Paul wrote to the Galatians. This is part one of this letter. Whenever we look at a Bible study, we want to ask 5 questions: the who, the what, the why, the how, and the when. So first of all, who wrote this letter? Well, we have a very clear indication from chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 5, verse 2, that it is Paul, and there is no reason to doubt the Pauline authorship. He also says in verse 1 that he is an apostle. Now, it's important to understand the definition of apostle, which we get from Acts chapter 1, verses 21 and 22. An apostle is one of the people who has witnessed the resurrection of Christ. And if you were present and you witnessed the resurrection of Christ, you would be called an apostle. Now, Paul, as you well know, is an interesting character. He persecuted the early church. You can read that in Acts chapter 8. He was dramatically converted, Acts chapter 9. He went from being Christianity's chief persecutor to its greatest missionary and apostle. He wrote 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. He was a student of Gamaliel and had a thorough understanding of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Acts 22, verse 3. He was a member of the ultra-Orthodox sect of the Pharisees, Acts 23, verse 6. He was a 1st century rising star, Galatians 1:14. And this is what Paul said of himself in Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 to 6. If anyone else thinks he has reason for confidence in the flesh, I have more. And then he lists 6 reasons. First, circumcised on the 8th day. Second, of the people of Israel. Third, of the tribe of Benjamin. 4, a Hebrew of Hebrews. 5, as to the law, a Pharisee. 6, as to zeal, a persecutor of the church. And 7, as to righteousness under the law, blameless. In other words, as far as human works were concerned, he was above reproach. His 3 missionary journeys and a trip to Rome turned Christianity from a faith that included only a small group of Palestinian Jewish believers into an empire-wide phenomenon. When was it written? Well, Galatians is one of 13 inspired letters he addressed to Gentile congregations or his fellow workers. In chapter 2 of Galatians, Paul describes his visit to the Jerusalem Council, mentioned in Acts 15. So he must have written Galatians after that event. Since most scholars date the Jerusalem Council around AD 49, the most likely date for Galatians is shortly thereafter. To whom was it written? Well, again, if you look at verse 2, he titles it to the churches of Galatia. I've included a map which should show up now. Galatians derives its title from the region in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, where the churches addressed were located. It is the only one of Paul's epistles specifically addressed to churches in more than one city. And we'll see that as we go through chapter 1, verse 2. The Galatians were a Celtic people who had migrated to that region from Gaul, modern-day France, in the 3rd century BC. The Romans conquered the Galatians in 189 BC, but allowed them to have some measure of autonomy until 25 BC, when Galatia became a Roman province. Galatia was divided into the northern territory, which was ethnic Galatia, and the southern territory, not inhabited by ethnic Galatians. That was parts of Lycaonia, Phrygia, Pisidia. Both territories, north and south, fell under Roman rule. In a political sense, Galatia came to describe the entire Roman province, not only the region inhabited by the ethnic Galatians. Paul founded churches in the southern region, in the cities of Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, and we can see that in Acts chapter 13 and 14. These cities, although within the Roman province of Galatia, were not in the ethnic Galatian region. We do not have any record of Paul founding churches in that northern, less populated region. Because of the north-south divide of the territory, it is more difficult to determine who the original recipients of this epistle were. Some interpret Galatia in its strict racial sense and argue that Paul addressed this epistle to churches in the northern Galatian region, inhabited by the ethnic descendants of the Gauls. Although Paul apparently crossed the border into the fringes of ethnic Galatia on at least 2 occasions, represented by Acts 16 verse 6 and Acts chapter 18 verse 23, Acts does not record that Paul founded any churches or engaged in any evangelistic ministry in the northern region. Because neither Acts nor Galatians mentions any cities or people from the northern region, it is reasonable to believe that Paul addressed this epistle to churches located in the southern part of the Roman province, but outside of the ethnic Galatian region. Acts records the founding of churches at Pisidian, Antioch, Acts 13, Iconium, also Acts 13 to 14, Lystra, Acts 14, and Derbe, also Acts 14. In addition, the churches Paul addressed had apparently been established before the Jerusalem Council met, and we see that in chapter 2, verse 5. And the churches of southern Galatia fit the criterion, having been founded during Paul's first missionary journey before the council met. If Paul did visit northern Galatia, it wasn't until after the Jerusalem Council, Acts 16 verse 6 and 18 verse 23. And that indicates that he visited the north, but we have no record of his founding any churches in the north. And also, if Paul was writing to people in the north, we would expect some firm indication that he had been there at some time. It would be curious, to say the least, to have no information about churches to which such an important letter was sent. Fourth question, why did he write the letter? Paul wrote Galatians to counter the Judaizing false teachers who were undermining the central New Testament doctrine of justification of faith. Ignoring the express decree of the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15 verses 23 to 29, they spread their dangerous teaching that Gentiles must first become Jewish proselytes and submit to all the Mosaic law before they could become Christians. Shocked by the Galatians' openness to this damning heresy, chapter 1 verse 6, Paul wrote this letter to defend justification by faith and to warn these churches of the dire consequences of abandoning the essential doctrines. Galatians is the only epistle Paul wrote that does not contain a commendation for its readers. This omission reflects how urgently he felt about confronting this heresy and defending the essential doctrine of justification. I've included a program for our study which consists of 16 lessons or sessions under 3 headings, which you will now see on the screen. Well, that's it for the introduction. If you have any questions, please forward them to me and we will deal with them in our next lesson. God bless.